I was 74 years old when I learned betrayal has a colder face than death itself. The call came at 6:47 a.m. My bank's automated system, mechanical and heartless, informing me that my account balance had dropped to $23.18. $640,000. Gone. Vanished like smoke in the wind while I slept. My hand shook as I dialed the bank's customer service line, hoping desperately this was some kind of mistake. The representative's voice was polite but final. "Ma'am, the transfers were authorized with your login credentials. Everything appears to be in order from our end." That's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Consider the house sold." 5 words that shattered my world. "Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story." The house behind me, this old colonial with its creaking floors and faded wallpaper, wasn't just 4 walls and a roof. It was 43 years of my late husband Robert's sweat and sacrifice. He'd worked double shifts at the factory, came home with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his bones, all to pay off this mortgage. We'd raised our son Daniel here, with storms both literal and financial, and buried dreams in these rooms when money got tight. That $640,000 wasn't lottery winnings or inheritance from some rich relative. It was Robert's life insurance policy, the sale of his father's small farm, and every penny we'd saved by choosing store-brand cereal over name brands, by mending clothes instead of buying new ones, by driving our old Buick until the transmission finally gave up. It was survival money, security money, the kind of nest egg that lets an old woman sleep peacefully, knowing she won't become a burden to anyone. But someone had decided I didn't deserve that peace. I walked through the empty house, each room echoing with memories that suddenly fell hollow. The kitchen where I'd packed Daniel's school lunches for 12 years. The living room where Robert and I had watched our wedding video every anniversary, laughing at how young and foolish we looked. The bedroom where I'd held his hand as cancer slowly stole him away, promising I'd take care of everything. Everything was quiet except for the grandfather clock Robert had inherited from his own father. Tick, tick, tick. Counting down seconds, I thought I had left to live comfortably in my own home. My neighbors, the Hendersons, waved from their porch as they did every morning. Mrs. Henderson called out, "Beautiful day, isn't it, Eleanor?" I waved back, unable to tell her that my beautiful days had just ended. How do you explain to someone that your own family, the people you sacrificed everything for, had just executed the perfect crime? The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent months worried about strangers breaking into my house, installing new locks and a security system that cost me $300 I could barely afford. Yet the thieves had walked right through my front door, probably shared a meal at my dining room table, and smiled in my face while planning my destruction. Daniel had been asking questions lately, casual questions that seemed innocent at the time. "Mom, do you really need such a big house? Have you thought about what happens to your accounts when you're gone? Maybe it's time to think about assisted living?" His wife, Jennifer, had been even more direct. "We worry about you living alone with all that money just sitting there." I brushed off their concerns as normal family worry. After all, what parent doesn't want to believe their child has their best interests at heart? What mother doesn't want to trust the son she carried for 9 months, the boy she stayed up with during fevers and nightmares, the man she celebrated when he graduated college, the first in our family to do so? But standing in my violated home, the pieces clicked together like a puzzle I'd been too naive to solve. The questions, the sudden interest in my finances, Jennifer's suggestion that I give them power of attorney, just in case something happens, Daniel's insistence on helping me set up online banking. "It's easier, Mom. You won't have to drive to the bank all the time." They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd played the long game, earning my trust while plotting my downfall. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times, and I realized I hadn't moved from the kitchen in 20 minutes. My coffee had gone cold, but my blood had gone colder. This wasn't just theft. It was assassination by 1,000 cuts, carried out by the people who were supposed to love me most. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my son and daughter-in-law had somehow gotten access to my accounts? That I'd trustingly given them information they could use against me? The shame felt almost as heavy as the betrayal. How does a woman my age admit she'd been outsmarted by her own family? But as I sat there in the silence of my empty house, something shifted inside me. The tears stopped. The shaking hands steadied. Because what Daniel and Jennifer had underestimated was something Robert had always known about me. I might be quiet, but I'm not weak. I might be trusting, but I'm not stupid. They thought they'd bury me alive financially, left me helpless and dependent on their mercy. But they'd forgotten something crucial about old women who survived the Great Depression, raised families on nothing, and watched their husbands die with dignity. We don't break easily, and we certainly don't forgive quietly. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that Robert had left me one final gift, hidden so deep that even I hadn't discovered it yet. A gift that would turn their perfect crime into their perfect nightmare. But first, I had to let them think they'd won. The seeds of this betrayal had been planted 18 months ago, though I was too blind to see them sprouting. It started innocently enough. Daniel and Jennifer began visiting more frequently, bringing little gifts, flowers from their garden, homemade cookies, a new throw pillow from my couch. At first, I was delighted. After Robert's death, the house had felt too quiet, too empty. Having my family around more often felt like a blessing. But blessings and curses sometimes were the same face. "Mom, you shouldn't be living in this big house all alone," Jennifer had said during one of those early visits, her voice dripping with false concern as she ran her finger along the mantelpiece, checking for dust. What if you fall down the stairs? What if something happens and no one finds you for days? I should have paid attention to how her eyes wandered around the room, calculating, appraising. Instead, I focused on her words, mistaking manipulation for love. Daniel was smoother, more subtle. He'd sit in Robert's old chair and lean forward with that earnest expression he perfected as a child when he wanted something. "I've been thinking about your future, Mom. About how to make sure you're taken care of. Have you considered updating your will? Making sure everything's organized?" The conversations always circle back to the same themes. My age, my vulnerability, my money, my house. But they package their greed so carefully and concern that I actually thank them for caring so much. Looking back, I can see the pattern clear as day. Every visit included some comment about my declining health, even though I was perfectly fine. They'd exchange meaningful glances when I forgot where I'd put my reading glasses, or took a moment longer to remember someone's name. Normal aging became evidence of my incompetence in their twisted narrative. "Maybe it's time to think about giving us power of attorney," Jennifer suggested one afternoon while helping me organize my medicine cabinet. "Not because anything's wrong now, but just to be safe. That way, if something happens, Daniel can handle your bills and banking without any hassle." I'd hesitated, some instinct warning me against it. But Daniel jumped in with that smile that had charmed teachers and girlfriends his whole life. "Mom, we're not trying to take over your life. We just want to help. You've done so much for me over the years. Let me do this to you now." How do you argue with logic wrapped in love? How do you refuse help from the son you'd do anything for? So I signed the papers. The banking came next. "Online banking is so much easier, Mom," Daniel had insisted, bringing his laptop to my kitchen table. "You won't have to drive across town every time you need to check your balance or pay a bill. I'll help you set it up." He'd been so patient, so helpful, walking me through each step, creating passwords, setting up security questions, explaining how to transfer money between accounts. What I didn't realize was that he was memorizing every keystroke, every security detail, every pathway into my financial life. "What's your mother's maiden name again?" he'd ask casually while setting up the security questions. "And what was the name of your first pet?" Information I gave freely because he was my son. Information that would later become the keys to my destruction. The visits became more frequent after that, always with some excuse, checking on me after a storm, bringing me dinner when I had a cold, helping me with small repairs around the house. But I started noticing things. Jennifer would disappear into other rooms, while Daniel kept me distracted with conversation. Once, I caught her coming out of my bedroom, claiming she'd been looking for a bathroom. Another time, I found papers on my kitchen counter that I didn't remember leaving there: bank statements, insurance documents, property tax records. When I asked Dan about them, he smiled and said, "Oh, I was helping you organize your files, remember? You were worried about keeping track of everything." Had I asked him to do that? My memory felt fuzzy around the edges, uncertain. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I was getting old and confused like they kept suggesting. That's the cruelest part of their scheme. They made me doubt my own mind. The final piece fell into place 3 months ago when they suggested I consolidate my accounts. "It's so much simpler to have everything in one place," Jennifer explained, showing me brochures for different banks. "And look at these interest rates. You could be earning so much more on your money." Daniel nodded enthusiastically. "Plus, with everything in one account, it's easier to manage, especially if something happens and I need to help you out." The new bank required all new passwords, new security questions, new procedures. Daniel was right there to help me through the whole process, so patient and caring. What loving son wouldn't want to make sure his elderly mother could navigate these complicated financial systems? Except he wasn't helping me navigate them. He was learning to navigate them himself. 3 months of preparation, 18 months of groundwork. They played the longest con game in the book, and I've been the perfect mark. Trusting, grateful, and completely oblivious to the trap closing around me. But I should have known. Greed always shows its teeth before it bites. The family dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Daniel had called that Tuesday afternoon, his voice warm and familiar. "Mom, Jennifer's making that pot roast you love so much. Why don't you come over tomorrow night? We haven't had a proper family dinner in weeks." I'd felt a flutter of happiness in my chest. Family dinners had become rare since Robert's death, and I missed the chatter, the laughter, the feeling of belonging somewhere. I spent 20 minutes picking out my best sweater, the blue one Robert had always said brought out my eyes. Their house was warm and inviting, filled with the smell of herbs and roasting meat. Jennifer greeted me with a hug that felt genuine, and Daniel kissed my cheek like he had as a little boy. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe I'd been imagining things, that perhaps my family really did just want what was best for me. The pot roast was perfect. Jennifer had remembered exactly how I liked it. Tender meat, carrots cooked just until soft, potatoes that melted in your mouth. We talked about ordinary things. The weather, the neighbors, Daniel's work at the insurance company. Normal family conversation that felt like a gift after months of strange tension. "Mom, you seem tired," Jennifer observed as we cleared the dishes. "Are you sleeping okay?" I admitted I'd been having trouble falling asleep lately. Though I didn't mention it was because I'd been lying awake wondering why my own family felt like strangers. "You should try some chamomile tea," Daniel suggested. "Jennifer makes this amazing blend with honey. It'll knock you right out." They insisted I take a cup home with me, along with leftover pot roast wrapped carefully in foil. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I felt guilty for doubting them. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe grief had made me suspicious of everyone, even the people who loved me most. I drank the tea before bed, grateful for its soothing warmth. It worked exactly as Daniel had promised. I fell asleep faster than I had in months, sinking into a deep, dreamless rest that felt like falling into a black hole. I should have wondered why the tea worked so well. I should have questioned why I felt so disoriented when my alarm went off. I should have noticed that my phone had been moved from its usual spot on the nightstand. Instead, I stumbled to the bathroom, still groggy from whatever had been in that innocent cup of chamomile tea, and tried to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. That's when I noticed my laptop was open on the kitchen table. I always close it before bed. Robert had drilled that habit into me years ago. Never leave electronics running overnight, Eleanor. It's a waste of electricity and a fire hazard. But there it sat, screen dark but clearly powered on. When I touched the mouse pad, my banking website appeared, still logged into my account. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to remember accessing it the night before. Had I checked my balance after dinner? I couldn't recall doing it, but then again, my memory of the evening felt strangely cloudy. I closed the laptop and went about my morning routine, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't until 6:47 a.m. that I understood just how wrong everything had gone. The automated call from the bank hit me like a physical blow. $640,000. Gone. Transferred in the middle of the night while I lay unconscious, drugged by my own family's kindness. My hands shook as I stared at the computer screen, watching the harsh truth unfold in black and white numbers. Transfer after transfer, all authorized with my login credentials, all processed while I slept the deep sleep of betrayed. The transactions had timestamps. 2:17 a.m., 2:23 a.m., 2:31 a.m. 3 separate transfers to 3 different accounts I'd never seen before. Whoever did this had taken their time, working methodically while I lay helpless upstairs. That's when my phone buzzed with that text message from the unknown number. Consider the house sold. 5 words that confirmed what my heart already knew, but my mind refused to accept. This wasn't random. This wasn't some sophisticated hacking scheme by strangers. This was family. This was the people I trusted most in the world, executing a plan they'd been perfecting for months. I dropped the phone, and it clattered onto the kitchen floor, the screen cracking in a spider web pattern that somehow seemed appropriate. Everything in my life was breaking, shattering into pieces I didn't know how to put back together. My legs gave out, and I found myself sitting on the cold linoleum, staring at the broken phone and thinking about the broken trust, the broken promises, the broken heart beating frantically in my chest. They drugged me. My own son and daughter-in-law had slipped something into that tea, waited for me to fall asleep, then crept into my house like common thieves. Except they weren't common thieves. They were worse. They were family, which made this crime unforgivable. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times, and I realized I was still sitting on the floor of my nightgown, clutching the bank statement like evidence in a murder case. Which, in a way, it was. They'd murdered my trust, assassinated my peace of mind, and killed any chance of a normal relationship ever again. But as I sat there in the ruins of my life, something else began to stir inside me. Not grief. I'd had enough of that when Robert died. Not fear. I'd survived worse than this. What I felt was something colder, sharper, more dangerous. I felt the quiet rage of a woman who'd given everything and received betrayal in return. My own blood had buried me alive. I didn't cry. That's what surprised me most about those first few hours after discovering the theft. I sat in Robert's old chair, the bank statement spread across my lap like evidence of the crime scene, and waited for the tears to come. They never did. Instead, I remembered things. Sharp, clear memories that cut through the fog of betrayal like broken glass. I remembered sitting in this same chair while Robert lay dying upstairs, promising him I'd take care of everything. "Don't worry about me," I'd whispered, holding his fevered hand. "I'll be fine. The insurance money will keep me comfortable, and Daniel's a good boy. He'll look out for me." Robert had squeezed my fingers with what little strength he had left. "You're stronger than you think, Eleanor. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I thought he was just being sweet, giving me false confidence to help me face widowhood. Now I wondered if he'd seen something I'd missed, some warning sign about our son that my grief had hidden from view. I remembered the night shifts Robert worked at the factory, coming home with his clothes stiff with sweat and his hands rough from machinery. He'd count out his paycheck on this very kitchen table, dividing it into careful piles. Rent, groceries, utilities, savings. Always savings, even if it was just $5 or $10. "Every penny matters, Eleanor," he'd say, sliding the coins into our old coffee can. "Someday we'll need this money, and we'll be grateful we saved it." 37 years of $5 and $10 bills. 37 years of choosing the cheaper option, buying generic brands, mending clothes instead of replacing them. Also his family with a security someday. I remember Daniel as a little boy, watching his father count money with wide, curious eyes. "Why'd we save so much, Dad?" he'd asked once. "Because family takes care of family," Robert had answered. "Everything we do is for you, son. Everything we save is so you'll never have to worry about money the way we did." The irony burned like acid in my throat. We'd sacrificed everything for Daniel's future, and he'd stolen that sacrifice to fund his present. I remembered his college graduation, how proud Robert had been despite the financial strain those 4 years had caused us. We'd eaten beans and rice for months to make tuition payments, driven our old car until it literally wouldn't start anymore, postponed medical appointments we couldn't afford. "It's worth it," Robert had said, watching Daniel walk across that stage. "He'll have opportunities we never dreamed of. He'll never have to work with his hands like I did." But somehow, in giving him those opportunities, we'd forgotten to give him character. I remember the early years of Daniel's marriage, when Jennifer would make little comments about our simple lifestyle. How she'd wrinkle her nose at our worn furniture, our outdated clothes, our careful spending habits. I tried to like her, tried to welcome her into our family, but she always made me feel inadequate, as if my whole life had been lived wrong. "Daniel deserves better than this old house," she'd said once, thinking I couldn't hear her talking to him in the kitchen. "When your parents are gone, we should sell it and buy something decent." Even then, they'd been planning my funeral, dividing up assets I was still using. The phone rang, startling me out of my memories. Daniel's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment, I felt the old automatic impulse to answer, to be the loving mother he expected me to be. Instead, I let it ring. It rang again an hour later. Then again. By afternoon, there were 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to. I knew what they'd say: false concern, manufactured worry, questions about why I wasn't answering. They want to gauge my reaction, to see if their plan had worked, to make sure I was properly defeated. But I wasn't defeated. I was something much more dangerous. I was calculating. Every sacrifice Robert and I had made played through my mind like a movie. Every night he'd worked overtime while I stayed home with a sick baby. Every birthday when we'd given Daniel presents we couldn't afford while going without ourselves. Every dream we deferred. Every comfort we'd skipped. Every luxury we denied ourselves. All for him. And this was how he repaid us. The rage built slowly, deliberately, like a fire fed with the right kind of fuel. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns bright and dies fast, but the cold, patient fury that smolders for years and never forgets. They'd made one crucial mistake in their perfect crime. They'd assumed that because I was old, I was helpless. Because I was trusting, I was stupid. Because I was quiet, I was weak. But old doesn't mean helpless. Trusting doesn't mean stupid. And quiet just means I know when to keep my mouth shut and when to open it for maximum effect. Robert had always said I was stronger than I thought. Sitting there in the wreckage of my financial life, I began to understand what he meant. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the woman who can lose everything and still plan her next move without shedding a single tear. They thought silence meant defeat. They had no idea silence was my weapon. 3 days passed before I answered Daniel's calls. And when I finally did, I made sure my voice shook just the right amount. "Mom, thank God we've been so worried. Why haven't you been answering your phone?" I let out what I hoped sounded like a confused, elderly sigh. "Oh, Daniel, something terrible has happened. I think someone stole my money." The pause on his end was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. The slight hesitation of someone who already knows exactly what you're about to tell them. "What do you mean, Mom? What happened?" "All my money is gone. The bank called and said someone transferred everything out of my accounts. $600,000, Daniel. Everything your father and I saved for 40 years. It's all gone." I let my voice break on the last word, throwing in a small sob for good effect. "Oh my God, Mom. That's horrible. Have you called the police?" "I don't know what to do," I whispered, playing the part of the helpless old woman they expected me to be. "I'm so confused. How could this happen? Who would do such a thing?" "Don't worry, Mom. Jennifer and I are coming over right now. We'll figure this out together." They arrived within 20 minutes, which told me they'd been waiting for this call, probably rehearsing their concerned family routine. Daniel wrapped me in what felt like a genuine hug, and for a split second, I almost forgot he was the enemy. Almost forgot that these arms had held me while he planned my destruction. "Tell us exactly what happened," Jennifer said, settling beside me on the couch with what looked like sincere concern. If I hadn't known better, I might have been fooled by her performance. So I told them the story they wanted to hear. The confused old woman story. How I discovered the missing money. How frightened I was. How helpless I felt. I even threw in some details about forgetting where I'd put things, wondering if maybe I'd somehow done this to myself without remembering. "Don't blame yourself, Mom," Daniel said, squeezing my hand. "These online scammers are getting more sophisticated every day. They target elderly people specifically because they know how confusing all this computer stuff can be." Online scammers. That was going to be their story. But how did they get into my accounts? I asked, letting confusion cloud my voice. I'm always so careful with my passwords. Daniel and Jennifer exchanged a quick glance, the kind of look that passes between co-conspirators checking to make sure their story is straight. "These criminals have ways," Jennifer explained patiently. "They can steal your information from anywhere, the grocery store, the gas station, even from your mailbox. You probably never even knew it was happening." I nodded along, playing my part perfectly while mentally noting every lie they fed me. They were good, I had to admit. They'd thought through their cover story, prepared explanations for every question I might ask. They'd just underestimated who they were dealing with. What should I do now? I asked, injecting the right amount of panic into my voice. "First, we need to report this to police," Daniel said. "Then we'll need to contact the bank, see what their fraud protection covers." "Don't worry, Mom. We'll handle everything." Of course they would. They'd file police reports that would go nowhere because they controlled all the evidence. They'd deal with the bank, probably claiming the transfers were fraudulent while secretly controlling the accounts the money went to. They'd manage every aspect of the investigation into their own crime. It was almost brilliant, if you could ignore the complete moral bankruptcy of it all. Over the next week, they were the perfect concerned family members. Daniel came by every day, ostensibly to check on me, but really to gauge how well their plan was working. Jennifer brought casseroles and offered to help with household tasks, playing a devoted daughter-in-law, while secretly cataloging everything valuable in my home. I let them baby me, accepted their help with gratitude, and played the role of the broken old woman whose spirit had been crushed by this terrible violation. Inside, though, I was taking notes. Mental photographs of every lie, every manipulation, every moment when they thought I wasn't paying attention. During one of these visits, I overheard Daniel on the phone in my kitchen, speaking in low, urgent tones. "The police report is filed," he was saying. "She's convinced it was online scammers." "No, she doesn't suspect anything." "Yeah, we should probably start talking to her about selling the house soon. She can't afford to keep it now anyway." Selling the house. The final insult, the last piece of their plan falling into place. But they'd made several mistakes in their perfect crime, and I was starting to see them clearly. They'd assumed I was too old and too trusting to investigate on my own. They'd counted on my grief and confusion to keep me dependent on them. Most importantly, they'd forgotten that this wasn't just any house they were trying to steal. This was Robert's house, the home we'd built together, filled with 40 years of memories and protected by 40 years of careful planning. What they didn't know, what I was only beginning to remember, was that Robert had been paranoid about protecting our assets. He'd grown up poor, lived through economic uncertainty, and never quite trusted that our security was permanent. He'd taken precautions, set up safeguards, created backup plans that even I didn't fully understand. "Always have a plan B," he used to say, "and never tell anyone what it is until you need it." I was starting to think I might need it very soon. That night, after Daniel and Jennifer left with promises to return tomorrow, I went down to the basement and opened Robert's old filing cabinet. I hadn't been through his papers since he died. The task had seemed too overwhelming, too final. But now, sitting on the concrete floor with boxes of documents around me, I began to understand that Robert had left me more than just money. He'd left me ammunition. Their first mistake was underestimating the old woman they stole from. Robert's files told a story I'd never heard before. Sitting in that dusty basement at 2 a.m, surrounded by boxes of documents I'd avoided for 3 years, I discovered that my quiet, hard-working husband had been planning for betrayal long before it arrived. The first folder contained insurance policies I knew about, but with beneficiaries listed in ways I didn't remember. The second held property deeds with clauses and conditions that made my head spin. But it was a third folder that stopped my heart completely. Eleanor's protection plan, written in Robert's careful handwriting across a manila tab. Inside were documents that revealed the truth about my supposedly stolen money. Robert hadn't just saved our nest egg. He protected it with legal safeguards that would make a lawyer proud. The $640,000 Daniel and Jennifer thought they'd stolen was real, but it was only part of the story. Robert had set up something called a revocable living trust, splitting our assets in ways I'd never understood when he explained it to me years ago. At the time, I'd nodded along, trusting him to handle the complicated legal stuff while I focused on day-to-day life. Now I understood why he'd been so insistent about those boring meetings with attorneys and financial planners. The papers showed that while Daniel and Jennifer had successfully accessed my regular checking and savings accounts, they'd only touched about half of our actual wealth. The rest was locked away in trust accounts they didn't even know existed, protected by legal barriers that would take them years to penetrate, if they ever could at all. But that wasn't even the most shocking discovery. According to a letter Robert had written to me, sealed and marked, open only if Eleanor faces financial betrayal. He'd suspected this might happen, not the specifics, but the possibility that our son might someday choose greed over family loyalty. My dearest Eleanor, the letter began, if you're reading this, then someone has stolen from you, and I'm not there to protect you anymore. I pray I'm wrong about Daniel, but a father sees things a mother's love won't let her acknowledge. The letter went on to explain that Robert had noticed troubling signs in our adult son. The way Daniel's eyes lit up when discussing our finances. How he'd ask pointed questions about inheritance laws. The calculating look that would cross his face when he thought no one was watching. I've set things up so you'll never be helpless, Robert wrote. But more than that, I've made sure that anyone who tries to steal from you will face consequences they never saw coming. Trust the process, Eleanor. Trust that I'm still taking care of you, even from beyond the grave. Attached to the letter were instructions for what Robert called Operation Payback, a step-by-step plan for turning the tables on anyone who betrayed me. The genius of it took my breath away. Robert had anticipated that thieves might gain access to our primary accounts, so he'd made sure those accounts were traceable. Every transaction Daniel and Jennifer had made was being automatically documented by security systems they didn't know existed. Their perfect crime was creating an evidence trail that would eventually destroy them. But Robert's plan went beyond just catching them. He'd structured our finances so that their theft would trigger a series of legal dominoes that would ultimately benefit me while ruining them. You see, the money they'd stolen wasn't just sitting in some foreign account beyond the reach of law enforcement. Robert had set up something called honeypot accounts, legitimate bank accounts designed to catch thieves. The moment someone accessed those accounts fraudulently, they automatically became subject to federal banking regulations that would freeze every asset they owned. Daniel and Jennifer thought they'd pulled off the perfect crime, but they'd actually walked into the perfect trap. The best part? They'd done it all to themselves. Every transfer they'd made, every lie they'd told to cover their tracks, every moment they'd spent congratulating themselves on their cleverness, all of it was being recorded and documented by systems Robert had put in place specifically for this purpose. But there was more, so much more. Robert had also prepared for the possibility that the thieves might try to force me out of my home. The house deed contained clauses that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to sell without my explicit consent, given in person, in front of multiple witnesses, and with a 30-day cooling-off period. That text message, "Consider the house sold," was just another example of their arrogance outpacing their intelligence. As I read through Robert's meticulous planning, I felt something I hadn't experienced since his death. Pride, not just in him, but in us, in the life we built together, in the love that had been strong enough to reach across death to protect me. Greed doesn't need an enemy. It destroys itself. And the loudest revenge is silence paired with patience. I've been operating on pure instinct, playing a helpless old woman, while secretly gathering information. But now I understood that I didn't need to gather anything. Robert had already gathered everything I needed, wrapped it up in a bow, and left it waiting for me to find. The question wasn't whether Daniel and Jennifer would face consequences for their betrayal. The question was how long I wanted to let them enjoy their false victory before their whole world came crashing down around them. Robert's letter ended with a warning that sent chills down my spine. Remember, Eleanor, justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is the one that takes its time. And my late husband had left me one final gift, hidden so deep that even I hadn't discovered it yet. The next morning, I called my grandson Tommy for the first time in 6 months. Tommy was Daniel's oldest boy, 22 and fresh out of college with a degree in computer forensics. Unlike his parents, he'd always been genuine with me, never asking probing questions about my finances or making comments about how I should live my life. "Grandma Eleanor, I've been meaning to call you," he said, his voice warm with genuine affection. "How are you doing?" "I've been better, sweetheart. I need to ask you something important, and I need you to keep this conversation between us. Can you do that?" There was a pause, then a more serious tone. "Of course, Grandma. What's going on?" I chose my words carefully. If someone wanted to steal money from an elderly person using their computer, how would they do it? Another pause, longer this time. "Grandma, has someone been messing with your accounts?" "Just humor me, Tommy. Pretend it's a hypothetical question for now." He sighed, but I could hear him settling in to explain. "Well, the most common way would be to get access to the person's login credentials, their usernames and passwords. They might do this by watching them type or by installing keylogger software that records everything they type on their computer. What if the person wasn't very good with computers and needed help setting things up? Then the thief would probably offer to help, maybe even insist on it. They'd say they were being helpful while actually memorizing all the security information. It's called social engineering, using trust and manipulation instead of technical skills." My heart sank, even though I'd expected this confirmation. And if they wanted to drug someone to make sure they stayed asleep during the actual theft? "Grandma." Tommy's voice was sharp now. "This isn't hypothetical, is it? Someone really did steal from you." I took a deep breath. "Your parents think I don't know it was them." The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. When Tommy finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "My parents stole from you?" $640,000, Tommy. They drugged my tea, used my computer while I was unconscious, and transferred everything to accounts they'd set up. Then they sent me a text message telling me to consider my house sold. Oh my God. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were. Mom's been talking about money problems lately, and Dad's been stressed about work, but I never thought. What kind of money problems? Tommy hesitated. Mom's been spending a lot on things we can't afford. New furniture, expensive clothes, a fancy car. Dad keeps talking about how his insurance commissions aren't enough to maintain their lifestyle. But Grandma, stealing from you, how could they even think about doing something like that? Because they think I'm old and helpless and won't fight back, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. They're wrong. What can I do to help? That question, asked without hesitation, without conditions, without calculating what he might gain or lose, reminded me that not everyone in my family had lost their moral compass. I need you to help me document what they did. Your grandfather left me some tools to fight back, but I need someone who understands computers to help me use them properly. I'll drive up this weekend, Tommy said immediately. And Grandma, I'm going to help you nail them to the wall. When Saturday arrived, Tommy came alone, telling his parents he was visiting a friend nearby. We spread Robert's documents across my kitchen table, and I watched my grandson's face change as he understood the scope of what his grandparents had built and what his parents had tried to destroy. Grandpa was a genius, Tommy said, examining the trust documents. This is like financial armor. They might have stolen from your checking account, but they can't touch any of the real assets. There's more, I said, showing him Robert's Operation Payback folder. Your grandfather suspected something like this might happen. Tommy spent 2 hours going through Robert's plan, occasionally whistling with admiration. This is incredible. He set up honeypot accounts that automatically trigger federal investigations when accessed fraudulently. The moment Dad and Mom transferred your money, they created evidence trails that lead straight back to them. So what happens now? Now we document everything, and then we sit back and watch them destroy themselves. Tommy said, Grandpa built this plan so that the thieves would face escalating consequences. First, their assets get frozen. Then the IRS gets involved because they can't explain where they got all this money. Then the federal prosecutors step in because wire fraud across state lines is a federal crime. And the house. Tommy grinned. The first genuine smile I'd seen from any family member in months. They can't touch it. The deed has so many protective clauses that it would take an army of lawyers years to break through them, and even then you have to voluntarily agree to the sale. Over the next week, Tommy helped me implement Robert's plan. We documented every theft, every lie, every manipulation. We set up monitoring systems to track what Daniel and Jennifer were doing with the stolen money. Most importantly, we prepared for the moment when their false sense of security would be shattered forever. The beautiful part was that we didn't have to do anything dramatic or confrontational. Robert's systems were already working, grinding through the legal process with mechanical precision. All we had to do was wait for the dominoes to fall. Every empire built on theft eventually crumbles, starting with theirs. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning in March. Daniel called me at 7:30 a.m., his voice tight, with barely controlled panic. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Have you talked to anyone about your financial situation? Any lawyers or investigators, or anyone? I kept my voice steady, confused. No, honey, why would I? You and Jennifer are handling everything for me, remember? The bank called me yesterday, he said, and I could hear him pacing. They're saying there are irregularities with the fraud claim we filed. They want to meet with you in person to go over the details of what happened. Of course they did. Robert's honeypot accounts were doing exactly what he designed them to do, creating so much suspicious activity that the bank's fraud detection systems were automatically triggering investigations. What kind of irregularities? I asked, playing my part perfectly. I don't know. They wouldn't tell me the details. But Mom, this is important. When you meet with them, you need to stick to the story we discussed. Remember? Online scammers stole your information and transferred the money without your knowledge. Of course, Daniel. That's what happened, isn't it? Another pause. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Just don't mention anything about us helping you with your computer or your accounts, okay? It might confuse things. After he hung up, I sat in Robert's chair and smiled for the first time in weeks. They were starting to panic, which meant Robert's plan was working exactly as he'd intended. The bank meeting was scheduled for Friday. Daniel insisted on coming with me, which gave me the perfect opportunity to watch him squirm as the vice president laid out what they'd discovered. Mrs. Patterson, the banker said, consulting a thick file, "We've been investigating the transfers from your account, and we found some concerning patterns. The money wasn't sent to random accounts overseas like we typically see with online scams. Instead, it went to 3 specific accounts, all open within the past year, all with connections to people in your immediate family." Daniel shifted in his chair beside me. What kind of connections? Well, that's where things get interesting. One account was opened using a cell phone registered to this address. The banker pointed to a printout. Another used a social security number that shows up as a dependent on tax returns filed by someone at this address. And the third account security questions were answered using information that would only be known by close family members. I let confusion cloud my features. I don't understand. What does this mean? It means, the banker said carefully, that whoever stole your money had intimate knowledge of your personal information and your family situation. This wasn't a random online scam, Mrs. Patterson. This was someone who knew you very well. Daniel was sweating now, small beads of perspiration forming along his hairline, despite the cool March air. Are you saying someone in my mother's family stole from her? I'm saying the evidence suggests that a possibility we need to investigate thoroughly. The meeting continued for another hour, with the banker asking detailed questions about who had access to my computer, who knew my passwords, who had helped me with online banking. Every question was a trap that Robert had set months in advance, and Daniel was walking into each one with the helpless inevitability of a man who'd forgotten he wasn't the smartest person in the room. By the time we left the bank, Daniel was pale and shaky. "This is bad, Mom," he said as we walked to the parking lot. "They're going to keep digging, and if they find out, I help you set up your online banking." "But you were just helping me," I said innocently. "Surely they'll understand that. You don't understand how these investigations work. They look for patterns, connections, anything that might suggest—" He stopped himself before finishing the sentence. "Suggest what, Daniel?" "Nothing. Never mind. Let's just go home." That evening, Jennifer called in tears. "Eleanor, something terrible is happening. The IRS is auditing our taxes, and they're asking all kinds of questions about income we can't explain. They want to know where we got the money for our new car and the furniture we bought last month." Of course they did. Robert's plan included automatic reporting systems that would flag any large expenditures made by people connected to fraudulent accounts. The IRS audit wasn't coincidence. It was inevitability. "Maybe you should talk to a lawyer," I suggested helpfully. "We can't afford a lawyer." Jennifer sobbed. "All our accounts are frozen while they investigate. We can't access any of our money, not even our regular paychecks. The mortgage company is threatening foreclosure, and Daniel's boss is asking questions about why the government is investigating him." The second domino had fallen. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched my son and daughter-in-law's carefully constructed life collapse in slow motion. Their credit cards were canceled. Their bank accounts remained frozen. Daniel was suspended from his job pending an investigation into his potential criminal activity. Meanwhile, I continued playing concerned mother and mother-in-law, offering sympathy and support while secretly marveling at the precision of Robert's revenge. They had taken my money thinking I was helpless. Instead, they'd triggered a chain reaction that was destroying everything they'd tried to steal for. But the most beautiful part was yet to come, because Robert's plan had one final twist that would teach them the true meaning of justice. They thought they had buried me alive financially, left me helpless and dependent on their mercy. But they'd forgotten something crucial about old women who survived the Great Depression, raised families on nothing, and watched their husbands die with dignity. The final confrontation came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in April, exactly 2 months after my money had disappeared. Daniel and Jennifer stood in my living room, looking like refugees from their own life. Daniel's hair was unwashed, his clothes wrinkled. Jennifer's makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the hollow look of someone who'd been crying for weeks. "Mom, we need to talk," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. I set down my teacup and looked at them with the same concerned expression I'd been perfecting for 2 months. "Of course, sweetheart. You both look terrible. Are you getting enough sleep?" Jennifer let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Sleep? We haven't slept properly in weeks. The police came to our house yesterday, Eleanor. They have a warrant to search all our financial records." "Police? Why would the police be interested in your finances?" Daniel collapsed into his father's old chair, the same chair where I'd sat planning their destruction. "Because they think we stole from you, Mom. They think we're the ones who took your money." I let shock register on my face. "That's ridiculous. You would never do such a thing. You're my son." "We know it's ridiculous," Jennifer said, desperation creeping into her voice. "But somehow all the evidence points to us. They found connections between your stolen money and our accounts, transactions we can't explain, even recordings of phone calls we don't remember making." Of course there were recordings. Robert's plan had included surveillance systems I was only beginning to understand the scope of. "But you filed a police report yourselves," I pointed out. "Why would you report a crime you committed?" "That's what we keep trying to tell them," Daniel said, running his hands through his hair. "But they say that's exactly what guilty people do. Report fake crimes to throw off suspicion." I shook my head in amazement. "This is terrible. What do your lawyers say?" "We can't afford lawyers," Jennifer whispered. "All our assets are frozen. We're about to lose our house. Daniel lost his job, and now we might go to prison for something we didn't do." The irony was so perfect, I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. They were experiencing exactly what they'd intended for me: financial ruin, helplessness, desperation. There has to be something we can do, I said, letting maternal concern fill my voice. Some way to prove your innocence. Daniel looked up at me with the same expression he'd worn as a little boy when he'd broken something valuable and needed me to fix it. Actually, Mom, there might be, but we need your help. Of course. Anything. The prosecutors say they might drop the charges if you publicly state that you believe we're innocent. If you testify that we would never steal from you, that you trust us completely. I stared at him for a long moment, letting the weight of what he was asking sink in. He wanted me to lie under oath to save him from the consequences of his crimes. He wanted me to perjure myself to protect the son who had drugged me and robbed me blind. Daniel, I said softly, are you asking me to lie? No, we're asking you to tell the truth. We didn't steal from you, Mom. We would never hurt you like that. But someone did steal from me, I pointed out. $640,000 didn't just disappear by itself. We know that, Jennifer said quickly. And whoever really did this, they were smart enough to make it look like we did it. But you know us, Eleanor. You know we're not thieves. I stood up slowly, walking to the window where I could see the garden Robert and I had planted together 40 years ago. The roses were blooming despite the rain, their red petals bright against the gray April sky. You know what's funny? I said, not turning around. The thieves sent me a text message. Consider the house sold, it said, like they thought they could just take everything I had and leave me with nothing. That's horrible, Daniel said. Whoever did that is heartless. I turned back to face them, and for the first time in 2 months, I let them see past a confused old woman act. Let them see the steel that Robert had always known was there. Yes, I said quietly. They were heartless, but they were also stupid. Something in my tone must have warned them, because I watched the color drain from both their faces. Mom, Daniel's voice was suddenly uncertain. You see, the funny thing about heartless, stupid thieves is that they always underestimate their victims. They think that because someone is old, they must be helpless. They think that because someone is trusting, they must be stupid. Jennifer was backing toward the door now, her instincts finally kicking in. But what those thieves didn't know, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, is that my husband spent 40 years preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal. He set traps that would catch anyone who tried to steal from me, and he made sure those traps would destroy them completely. Daniel stood up slowly, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that your father knew there was a snake in our family, and he made sure that snake would eventually devour itself. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Jennifer spoke, her voice barely a whisper. You knew all along. I knew you drugged my tea. I knew you used my computer while I was unconscious. I knew you sent that text message. And I know that every day for the past 2 months, you've sat at my table and eaten my food while pretending to comfort me about a crime you committed. Daniel's face cycled through confusion, denial, and finally, desperate anger. You can't prove anything. It's your word against ours. I walked to Robert's old desk and pulled out a thick folder I'd been saving for this moment. Actually, I don't need to prove anything. Your father already proved everything. Every phone call, every lie, every moment you thought you were so clever, he recorded it all. I opened the folder and showed them surveillance photos, transaction records, and audio recordings that documented their entire scheme. Robert's protection plan had been more comprehensive than even I had realized. The beautiful part, I said, watching them absorb the scope of their exposure, is that I didn't have to do anything except wait for you to destroy yourselves. You stole from honeypot accounts that automatically triggered federal investigations. You spent stolen money in ways that created audit trails leading directly back to you. You thought you were committing the perfect crime, but you were actually walking into the perfect trap. Jennifer was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Eleanor, please, we can explain. We were desperate. We had debts. We thought you had more money than you needed. I had exactly the money I needed, I said coldly. Money your father and I saved for 40 years by sacrificing everything for you. And you stole it because you thought I was too old and too weak to fight back. Daniel tried one last desperate play. Mom, we're family. We made a mistake, but we're still your family. You can't let them send us to prison. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Where was the little boy I'd raised? Where was the young man we'd put through college? When had he become this person who could drug his own mother and steal her life savings? Family doesn't steal from family, Daniel. Family doesn't drug elderly relatives and leave them helpless. Family doesn't send cruel text messages about selling someone's home. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. I think you should leave now. The police will be here soon to arrest you, and I don't want to watch that happen in my living room. As they gathered their things with shaking hands, Jennifer turned back one last time. We'll pay it back. Somehow, we'll pay back every penny. You can't pay back trust, I said. And you can't pay back the nights I lay awake wondering how my own son could betray me so completely. After they left, I sat in Robert's chair and finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the money. That had never really been gone, thanks to Robert's planning. Not for my safety. I'd never actually been in danger. I cried for the family that had died with their betrayal. For the son I'd lost agreed. For the relationship that could never be repaired. But mostly, I cried with relief that justice had been served without me having to sacrifice my dignity or my principles to get it. Robert had been right about everything. Justice didn't need to roar. Sometimes it whispered. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge was simply letting greedy people destroy themselves. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same chair, reading a letter from Tommy. Dear Grandma, it said, I thought you'd like to know that Dad's appeal was denied. He and Mom will serve the full sentence. 3 years for wire fraud, 2 additional years for elder abuse. The judge said their crime was particularly heinous because they targeted a vulnerable family member who trusted them completely. I folded the letter carefully and set aside. Justice had taken its time, just as Robert had predicted, but had been thorough when it finally arrived. The money had been recovered, of course. Every penny, plus interest and penalties that Daniel and Jennifer would be paying off for the rest of their lives. But more than that, the investigation had uncovered other fraudulent activities. Fake insurance claims, tax evasion, identity theft involving several elderly neighbors. My son and daughter-in-law hadn't just been occasional criminals. They'd been running a full-scale operation, using their respectable facade to prey on vulnerable people throughout our community. I wasn't their first victim. I was just the first victim whose husband had been paranoid enough to set a trap. The house still stood strong around me, its mortgage long paid off, its deed secured by Robert's careful planning. The garden bloomed each spring just as it had for 40 years. The grandfather clock still chimed every hour, marking time that felt precious now that I understood how quickly it could be stolen. But the biggest surprise had come 3 months ago, when Robert's lawyer had contacted me about a safe deposit box I didn't know existed. Inside was a second letter from my husband, along with documents that revealed the final piece of his protection plan. My dearest Eleanor, the letter read, If you're reading this, then Operation Payback was successful, and the people who betrayed you are facing the consequences they deserved. But I have one more gift for you. The documents show that Robert had set up a second trust fund, completely separate from our other assets, funded by life insurance policies and investments I'd never known about. The fund had been growing for 20 years, and by the time I discovered it, it contained over $800,000. But the money came with specific instructions. It was to be used to help other elderly people who have been victimized by financial crimes. Use this to make sure no other family has to go through what we did, Robert wrote. Turn our pain into someone else's protection. So that's what I did. I worked with Tommy to establish the Patterson Foundation for Elder Financial Protection, offering free legal services and investigation assistance to seniors who've been defrauded by family members or scammers. We'd already helped 37 families recover stolen assets and seen 12 criminals sentenced to prison. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel and Jennifer's greed had funded their own worst nightmare, an organization dedicated to catching and prosecuting people exactly like them. Tommy had become my right hand in running the foundation, and watching him dedicate himself to protecting vulnerable seniors gave me hope that not everyone in my family had lost their moral compass. You know what I think Grandpa would say about all this? Tommy asked during one of our weekly planning meetings. What's that? That the best revenge isn't just watching bad people destroy themselves. It's making sure their destruction creates something good for other people. He was right, of course. Robert had always believed that everything happened for a reason, that even the worst betrayals could be turned into something meaningful if you were patient enough and smart enough to see the bigger picture. As I write this story, sharing it with all of you, I'm not looking for sympathy or praise. I'm sharing it because somewhere out there, another elderly person is being manipulated by family members who think age equals helplessness. Another trusting parent is being set up for betrayal by children who've forgotten where they came from. If that's you, please remember this. Greed doesn't need an enemy because it destroys itself. The loudest revenge is silence paired with patience. And just because you're old doesn't mean you're powerless. Trust but verify, even with family. Especially with family. Document everything. Question sudden interest in your finances. Don't let anyone convince you that asking questions makes you paranoid or difficult. And remember that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones most capable of devastating betrayal. But they're also the ones who underestimate your strength the most. By sunrise on that terrible morning in March, Daniel and Jennifer thought they had stolen everything from me. They thought they had left me broken, helpless, dependent on their mercy. But justice doesn't live by their clock. Justice arrives when it's ready, delivered by people who plan ahead and love deeply enough to protect from beyond the grave. My husband had been gone 3 years when his final gift saved my life and destroyed my enemies. Love like that doesn't die with the body. It lives on in the careful preparations we make for the people we cherish most. I wasn't left with nothing after their betrayal. I was left with freedom. Freedom from the burden of loving people who didn't deserve it. Freedom from the exhaustion of trusting people who were plotting against me. Freedom to use my remaining years helping others instead of wondering when the next betrayal would come. That's the real victory here. Not that Daniel and Jennifer were caught and punished, though they deserved everything they got. Not that I recovered my money, though I'm grateful for Robert's foresight. The real victory is that I discovered I was stronger than I thought, smarter than they assumed, and more protected than I ever knew. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, if you believe that justice can be quiet yet powerful, then please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories about love, betrayal, and the triumph of good over evil. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you find the strength to fight back? Your stories inspire others who might be facing similar battles, and sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward finding justice. Remember, silence isn't weakness. Patience isn't passivity. And the quiet strength of people who survived everything life can throw at them should never, ever be underestimated. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love, and always, always have a plan B.